Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. Okay, so first bit of housekeeping. You may have noticed that recently a certain other video has popped into your feed. It's a video that I low-key kind of dreaded making, but I knew eventually would probably have to be made. You see, in an attempt to try and prepare in case my channel gets taken down or whatever, I have actually tried to make sure that all the videos that I have get uploaded to a flash drive, and I managed to upload all of my main series videos into a flash drive to make sure that I don't lose them. However, in doing so, that gave me a little bit of an idea, because since I have all the video files together once and for all, and every time before I delete the file from my computer, I'll upload the file into there as well. And I have it organized. Maybe I'll show it to you one day. But with all of the videos together, it has given me some ideas, one of which would be uploading them to other video sharing websites, again, just in case this channel goes bye-bye, so I can have them all up there. However, the only problem I have with that right now is that I don't have the podcast up there. I tried to upload a podcast onto there, and it said that the file was too big. So I'm trying to figure out, I'm sure you figure out, if I need a second flash drive just for the podcasts, which would be ridiculous, but it'd be funny nonetheless. Or if I could suffice by getting the audio of the podcast and not the visuals, which would suck for the visual episodes. Again, that's not really here nor there. It's honestly, if the podcasts that were made before 2020 disappeared, I wouldn't necessarily mind that much. But, it's a good thing that my channel hasn't really had any big issues in regards to, takedowns or copyright issues. This is all basically a just-in-case situation. But one of the ideas that I had was taking the videos, because I see a couple of YouTubers that I do watch do this sometimes, most notably Channel Awesome, and when I was subscribed to the Game Grumps, they did this as well, where they would upload the full series. And then there's another channel I watch called Spilling the Milk, which reacts to a bunch of cartoons, and then after they finish a series, they'll take all the episodes they made and then splice them together and then make it into a big video called We Binge This Series. So I basically thought of the idea, would you guys be down with the Pluribus Unum compilation videos? And I'm sure when you guys said that, you didn't, I saw the results and I immediately made the first compilation. And I figured that the first and easiest compilation to make would be the political ideology videos, because a lot of them were shorter, so it was very easy to make. And I tried to check the compilation videos to make sure, is there a transition that I need to do? And no, you don't need a transition. The only thing you really need is a chapter thing to divide the video into chapters. And sometimes you don't even need that. So I basically asked and said, would you guys be down for it? You guys overwhelmingly said yes, or at least the people who bothered to vote in the poll said yes. Okay, so there were 7 votes. Okay, so overwhelmingly 75% said yes. One person, I guess, said no. But anyways, yeah. So I guess overwhelmingly they wanted compilation videos. And then I decided to do a test run with this, again, political ideology videos. And I'm trying to do something to make sure that they get looked at a little bit more. They're given certain, they're given, the name of this one is What Are Political Ideologies? Because it's a play on the fact that a lot of the political ideology videos that I do are what is, and then insert ideology here. I put necessary tags and hashtags and then just waited to see how it did. And the first day, it amassed 157 views and 10 likes. So I guess I'm going to be doing these now. I don't necessarily think I have a plan for compilation videos, though ideally, I would probably want to have the compilation videos. I guess I should put that to a poll too, because I uploaded the compilation video on Thursday, which is the day that a video would come out, but since videos come out bi-weekly, instead you got a compilation. I guess if you're listening to this part of the video, then you can let me know in the comments. Is that a schedule that you're okay with? Where it's the Thursday in which a video doesn't come out, you get a compilation instead. Or if you're okay with me giving a different day to the compilations. Again, kind of doing it like, at the very least, bi-weekly, but realistically, I probably won't do them that much because it's like, I'm trying to figure out like what compilations I would post and what would be needed to post. Like, I mean, of course, ideally certain ones, like, you know, all the series, all the videos in one series together. But then, of course, that means this compilation that we have now will eventually have to be deleted when I make more videos in the political ideology, like sphere, ideology, whatever. When I inevitably make more political ideology videos, I'm going to have to delete this one. Or maybe I won't, because you don't have to do them. You could just do it and milk the views. I mean, if I had ads enabled, then that'd be one thing, but I don't have ads enabled, so it doesn't really matter. And I do have a poll where I'm going to ask you guys what video, like what series would you want me to do like a compilation on next. And I think the party history video's in it. I would recommend to not vote for the party history one, at least not yet. That's just going to be a hint for something. But anyways, with all that rambling out of the way, let's get right into the news. It was actually a pretty slow news week for America. So instead, I'm actually just going to do the American story first. Because I technically only have 2 stories, but that second story is a ton of stories merged together into one. I don't know if I'm going to divide them up individually in the podcast, because I think I'm just going to talk about them all at once. So anyways, first, sad news. Democrat Gabe Abo won the Rhode Island congressional race over Aaron Rugenberg. I mean, I guess I have to give it to Abo, like Amo, that's his name, Amo. Did I say Abo? Anyways, Gabe Amo won, and he will be the first person of color to represent Rhode Island in Congress, potentially. I think this is a district that is, like, kind of in play, but realistically, it is a blue district, so he probably will win. I have to give props to him. That is cool that did happen, but sadly at the expense of Aaron Rugenberg, who would have been a really fine member of Congress. Hopefully Amo is at the very least tolerable. And the next news stories all revolve around the Mexican presidential race, because things are heating up. Things are officially heating up. When we last left off, Xochitl Galvez had officially gotten the nomination of the Broad Front of Mexico. On the other side of the aisle, the Juntos Hacemos Historia coalition had finished voting and was starting to tally up the votes to figure out who would lead their coalition in the upcoming election. The citizens movement was still trying to figure out what the heck to do. People were waiting for big bombshells to happen. And on the citizens movement side, we got the first of the biggest bombshells, Luis Donaldo Colosio Riojas, announcing that he would not run for the presidency of Mexico in 2024, stating that he didn't want to be the one responsible for a divided opposition. I'll be real, that was the biggest shock that I got out of this race. The fact that he didn't run was surprising. Everybody thought that he was running. Every single person thought that he was running. It's basically when Joe Biden announced that he wasn't going to run for president in 2016. Everybody thought he was running. And the fact that he didn't is surprising, like completely out of left field. I'm being serious. Literally every single poll about the election had Luis Donaldo Colosio as the candidate of the citizens movement. The only ones that didn't had him leading a united coalition. I even went so far as to say that I thought that he had more of a chance of being president of Mexico than whoever the opposition coalition would nominate. Because I really did think that he was the person who was part of the biggest, like he was literally the one person that I literally felt could have taken the citizens movement somewhere big. But I guess in the citizens movement's drama, he really did show what side he was truly on. For those who don't remember, citizens movement has been having marital problems because some members of the party, led by their leader, Dante Delgado, have been trying to maintain electoral independence. trying to run a singular candidate outside of a united coalition of opposition candidates. Meanwhile, there was another side, led by one of their governors, Enrique Alfaro Ramirez, who was trying to essentially push the party into joining the united opposition. And the two people that were seen as like figureheads for the party, Samuel Garcia, the governor from Nuevo Leon, and Luis Donaldo Colosio, early on, they did think that Colosio was sort of like the more conciliatory one of the two, but they still felt that he would be the nominee regardless. But it turns out he really did show that he was the more conciliatory one, and that put the citizens' movement in a little bit of a bind. We'll get back to them later. Now let us transition into Juntos Hacemos Historia, which officially announced the results of their party's primary. And for those who don't remember their primary process, they would have 5 polls conducted, 4 of which would be given to media companies / polling firms that Morena trusted, and then the last one would be conducted by Morena itself. They would take all of the results of those polls and then weigh them together. The winner of the weighted results would be the nominee, and the top 2 candidates behind them would be guaranteed positions in the cabinet, as a way to sort of quell any potential drama that could go from all of them. The day before the results were announced, I released my predictions for the results. I predicted the results would be as follows: Manuel Velasco Coello, the PVM candidate, on the bottom. Above them, Ricardo Monreal Avila. Above them, Aiden Augusto Lopez. Above them, Gerardo Fernandez Noroña. Then Marcelo Ebrard. Then Claudia Sheinbaum. Now, the reason why I predicted that was because the polls that were being conducted that were showing favorability, the ones that wouldn't count, they were actually showing that Noroña was steadily gaining support, which I think poised to do him really well, because he was the one that really was sort of make or break candidate. The rest of them, you sort of knew where they stood. You knew that, there wasn't really going to be that much popularity between Aiden Augusto Lopez or Ricardo Monreal Avila. You knew that Coello, and to an extension Noroña, would basically cater to their individual party bases. You knew Ebrard was going to represent sort of the more right-leaning aspects of the party, and Claudia Sheinbaum basically was sort of the de facto candidate, so everybody was like, okay, so a majority of the people in the party would probably back her. The results were not what I thought. On the bottom, we had Ricardo Monreal Avila. Honestly, that was the biggest shock that he got last. Although in retrospect, it makes sense, because I don't think he would get that much support. I think really the biggest thing about Ricardo Monreal Avila was the fact that his support would basically be exclusively in one state, and even then, it's not like he has a huge margin of victory within that state, because Zacatecas, they don't really like the Monreal Avila brothers. Manuel Velasco Coello was above them. A bit surprising, I guess PVM had a larger voice than they thought. Above them, Gerardo Fernandez Noroña. Now, I wasn't necessarily completely off, because in the individual polls that were conducted, he actually did really well in those polls. Sometimes he would even beat Augusto Lopez. But the fact of the matter was, when you weigh them all, it doesn't really matter. Then, of course, we have Aiden Augusto Lopez. I didn't expect him to have that much support in Morena, but I guess he's basically the ones who basically want just AMLO repeated. Then we have Marcelo Ebrard, and of course, Claudia Sheinbaum won, which of course is giving a lot of people a lot of praise for Mexico, because considering the 2 major party candidates in this election are 2 women, barring a major upset, Mexico will be electing its first female president. Hashtag girl power. Though to be fair, don't count them out yet. Mexico has had some upsets politically, but, for the most part, everybody is seeing that Mexico will probably be electing its first female president. Most people agree that it will probably be Sheinbaum, but they're still thinking Galvez might hypothetically, if Galvez wins, Mexico still gets a female president. And everybody's enthusiastic with the idea. Well, except one man who was not so enthusiastic about the fact that Scheinbaum is going to be in the general election. That person being Marcelo Ebrard, who has made a big announcement, because look at all the photos of Claudia Scheinbaum accepting the nomination. You see Noronha, you see Coelho, you see Avila, you see Aiden Augusto Lopez. You don't see Marcelo Ebrard. That's because Marcelo Ebrard is denouncing the results of the polls being conducted, claiming that the process must be redone, that he counted irregularities in the process, that in actuality, he should be the nominee. And while everybody in the Morena party are saying there is literally no process, there's no issue, and even if there was an issue, the issue probably will not lead to a change in the results, because the results were really just like Claudia Scheinbaum got like 10 points above Marcelo Ebrard. Even if there were issues, it doesn't seem like it would change the results of the election. First of all, big shame that this is just going to be a thing. This just shows this is just going to be a thing now, where every single election cycle now, we're going to have one of the candidates just flat out claim the results were rigged against them, that they lost, that they didn't lose the election fair and square, or they're not going to call into systemic issues in regards to election processes. But in fact, they're just going to say, no, the election was rigged, I should be the candidate in the end. Trump in 2020, Jair Bolsonaro, Guatemala with Sandra Torres. It's just going to keep happening now. And the problem is, in Mexico, there's somewhat of a history in regards to shady election stuff. In 1988, the election was literally just flat out stolen from Cuauhtemoc Cárdenas, and in 2006, there were huge issues regarding the voting results, which led AMLO to declare himself the legitimate president of Mexico in 2006, and in 2012, there were similar claims of voter fraud, but albeit to a lesser extent, to where AMLO couldn't really do anything about it. And Marcelo is the only candidate in the field who has stated that he is not 100% into backing Scheinbaum. And during this process, some information got revealed because early on in the election process, it appears that Ricardo Monreal Avila and Marcelo Ebrard were actually in discussions with the citizens movement really early on in the campaign. Marcelo Ebrard has sort of remained in the field of communication with the citizens movement, because the citizens movement, they said, if either of you two want to be our nominee, you have to leave the Morena process, you have to denounce Morena, and you have to join our party. But neither have done so, and Marcelo Ebrard is now being re-brought up as a potential candidate to run as the citizens movement candidate, which makes sense considering the citizens movement just lost the candidates that they thought would take them into big results in the upcoming election. Really, they don't have that much outlet left outside of Marcelo Ebrard. At this point, it's either take Morena's backwash or join in the backwash that is the massive opposition coalition. The citizens movement will not truly be independent in this upcoming cycle. Speaking of independent, that also has led to a lot of issues, because right around the time the processes ended, also ended the idea of independent candidates filing for Mexican president. 27 people filing with the INE to run for the presidency of Mexico as independents. The process of doing so is that first you have to officially register and get all your paperwork in order, and then second, you can collect some petitions, and if you manage to get at least 1% of the country's entire electorate distributed equally across 17 states within a period of 120 days, you will then be registered as an independent presidential candidate. And of the candidates that filed, of the 27 people who filed, only 6 people have been given the go-ahead to do so. And really, of those 6, I can really see only 3 of them actually being able to potentially do so. And coincidentally, those three people actually have Wikipedia articles. First, we have Ulysses Ernesto Ruiz Ortiz, who is the former pre-governor of Oaxaca. Then we have Hugo Eric Flores Sorrentes, who was the leader of the Social Encounter Party and the Solidarity Encounter Party. Since neither of his parties are on the ballot, I'm guessing that he's going to try and seek run as an independent. He actually tried to run for president in 2018, but he didn't really end up doing so hot because nobody wanted to register him. And last, but certainly not least, we have Eduardo Verastegui, who is a conservative Catholic actor who is a huge anti-abortion activist. And literally, I tweeted that I thought that he was going to be the fourth, because in Mexican politics, at least since the 2000s or the late 90s, or I guess 1988, there's always been a divide between the three people. You always have the three people who represent the major factions of the Mexican political scene, the right, left, and center. And then you have a fourth person who represents something completely different. It changes every cycle. You had El Bronco in 2018. You had Gabriel Quadri in 2012. In 2006, there was 2006, it was a social democrat that did it. But literally, the fourth person can be literally anybody in the Mexican political spectrum. Those three are the most likely people to actually make it on the ballot as an independent candidate. In fact, if I had to put money on it, Verastegui will be probably the person who actually ends up making it on the ballot. I don't think Hugo Flores will end up getting on the ballot, or the other guy, but Hugo Flores could make it on the ballot. Verastegui and I guess Flores are going to be interesting candidates because they're both anti-abortion, and Mexico literally just decriminalized abortion. So it's just that'll be an interesting development, to say the very least. Literally, America just criminalized abortion, and then we're going to have the first election post-abortion being gone. Then Mexico's going to have their first election post-abortion becoming a thing. So it's that's interesting, to say the very least. With all of that out of the way, let's move on to the main topic of this video. For a second, you probably thought that was the main topic considering I talked about it so much. But we're not going to be focusing on that Latin American election. We're going to be focusing on this one. But before we get into that one, we're going to have to talk about the prelude and importance. And much like the other ones, and considering this is going to be the last foreign election I talk about this year, at least as a main topic, this one's going to have a long backstory. Bear with me. Okay, so the first election that changed politics in Argentina was in 1916, as that was the first year that they had universal and mandatory voting. That's right, in Argentina, voting is mandatory, so people literally have to vote in the upcoming election. And due to the fact that universal and mandatory voting became a thing, this country elected its first non-conservative president in Hipólito Yrigoyen of the Radical Civic Union. Yrigoyen was identified as a personalist, which for all intents and purposes basically meant that he was a center-left liberal populist, and he used his power to push for massive reforms against the wishes of an opposition Congress, giving the country a pension, improving factory conditions, regulating working hours, and among other things, earning him the nickname the Father of the Poor. However, Yrigoyen was not perfect. As much as he advocated for the workers during labor conflicts, he didn't really do much when the police would end up clashing with striking workers. Accusations that he was growing too much power and was overstepping elected Congress, among a lot of other things, including just some very vague criticisms of his personality. As such, there was a large section of the population that openly opposed him. So much so that someone literally made 2 animated movies mocking him. In fact, I made videos on that topic. His party would end up winning another term with Marcelo T. de Olivar, who would end up becoming the face of an anti-personalist faction against Yrigoyen, which ultimately pushed him to run for another term, which he ended up winning in 1928. However, as typical for Latin America, that didn't end up lasting. September 6, 1930, Lieutenant General Jose Felix Uriburu led a coup against Irigoyen and took over the nation, leading to a period that is now known as the infamous decade, where conservative members of the military ruled the government as a lowercase d dictator, basically relying on voter fraud and suppression to keep power. Then on June 4th, 1943, the Argentine military overthrew their leaders and established a different military dictatorship. And despite one of the leaders wanting Argentina to be fascist, they would end up joining the Allies during World War II, and were basically using that to avoid people in Argentina rising up against them. Another thing that happened to distract them was the 1944 San Juan earthquake, which they delegated to a military colonel serving as the Secretary of Labor and Social Security, who sought the aid of many prominent celebrities to help raise funding for the cause. However, this act would end up leading to that colonel to get a ton of people in their corner, which made many members of the military scared. So they tried to suppress him by putting him in jail. But then a prominent actress led a massive protest to get him out of jail, which ended up propelling the two into becoming a powerful duo that would end up winning the next Argentinian election. I'm of course talking about Juan and Eva Perón, whose administration pushed for the aptly named Peronism, and had a party to spread the ideology called the Justicialist Party. Peronism basically meant whatever Juan and Eva Perón wanted it to mean at the time, borrowing elements from the left and the right, kind of like third positionism or bourgeois socialism, Perón being inspired by Mussolini, but since he only went to the well-off areas in fascist Italy, he saw Italy as a social democracy. Take that what you will. He advocated for extreme nationalism and for the poor, but very little was done for them outside of rhetoric, which made him appeal to people on both the right and the left. One change Perón did that was very much influenced by Evita was the fact that he extended suffrage to women, forming a female party for his feminine supporters. A party that grew so powerful that they actively pressured Perón and Eva to run as a joint ticket, but Eva's health prevented that from happening. Either way, Perón won in a massive landslide. However, Perón would not really do much in his second term due to Eva's death, and many in the military were not too enthused with him anyways, and were hoping that the next election they could just get rid of him. However, the party remained powerful, and it looked like Peronism would continue to thrive in Argentina. That is, until 1955, when two attempts to overthrow Juan Perón occurred, one in June and one in September, called Revolución Libertadora, the latter actually causing Perón to leave the nation, putting another military leader in charge. Except this one was a little interesting, as the guy who did the coup, Eduardo Leonardi, saying that this coup would have ni vencedores ni vencidos, neither winner nor losers, and would try to keep things as peaceful as possible. And some within the anti-Peronist coalition that put him there were concerned, so a new guy, Pedro Eugenio Aramburu, was put in charge instead, who was way harsher on Peronism, flat out banning it from running in all future elections, and specifically banning Perón from running as well. Elections were held in 1958, which saw the Radical Civic Union return to power, but one particularly hated leader from the party led to some unrest, and military leaders used this to apparently openly talk about doing a coup against him, which they did in 1966, and they would rule until 1973, when pressure was building to force them to bring back democracy, even allowing Peronists to run for president, but not Juan himself. A left-leaning Peronist named Hector Jose Campora would run and win. A mere 47 days into his term, he would resign from the presidency and call for elections in September, which Juan Perón would run and win in. However, 1 year into his term, he suffered many heart attacks and died, leaving his VP and wife, Isabel Perón, to take over as leader. This is where Peronism started having a shift rightward, with her leading something called Orthodox Peronism, and beginning what would become the Argentine Dirty War to combat communist threats against her. But soon, things went from bad to worse, when in 1976, say it with me now, another military coup happened. this time with approval from the United States. And how bad were these guys? Even though Orthodox Peronism and Isabel Perón are considered somewhat far right, these guys make Isabel look like freaking Che Guevara in regards to the Argentine Dirty War. All parties were banned, leftists were kidnapped and tortured and murdered. Look into the videos on the topic by the Gravel Institute and Bad Empanada for more in-depth analysis. But around 30,000 people were disappeared. Anger grew in Argentina, leading to calls for elections in 1983, which led to the rise of a figure by the name of Carlos Menem, who created his own branch of Peronism called Federal Peronism, which was essentially a neoliberal economic model using Perón's populist rhetoric to remain popular. It's still relatively prevalent in Argentinian politics, but it was heavily controversial within his base and the general populace, putting the UCR back in power. But a massive recession forced them to resign, and Peronists were appointed to call for a new election in 2003, where Menem sought the presidency once more. And despite the fact that a runoff was planned, Menem decided to suspend his presidential bid before the runoff could even happen, because polls indicated that his opponent would get 70% of the vote in the upcoming election. That opponent being a man by the name of Nestor Kirchner, another Peronist, leading a secondary faction of the Judicialist Party called Kirchnerism, which is a left-wing faction of Peronism running under the ballot line Frente para la Victoria. And while Kirchner was still broadly a social democrat and even moderated himself a little bit to become more palatable outside of the Peronist base, he did maintain relations with more radical figures like Hugo Chavez, and he made a big point to cut ties with the IMF, implementing foreign currency controls to make sure the Argentine peso would gain value. Nestor had maintained a decently good approval rating throughout his term, and he decided to refuse second term. Instead, his wife, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, would run instead. She was very influential in his administration, and he was very influential in hers, which led to a lot of comparisons to the Perons, and even Hillary and Bill Clinton, with people even claiming that the Kirchners were forming a cult of personality around themselves, much like the Perons. There was even a conspiracy theory that the two planned to alternate presidential terms in order to retain power. Now, due to all this, CFK, as she is known as, was not as well liked as her husband, and at the tail end of her first term, Nestor died, so she faced a bout of depression as well. That, and very vague critiques regarding her administration, led to her second term not being as impactful as her first one, and then her candidates didn't do so hot when it was time for her to pass the torch. And the person who ended up replacing her was a guy by the name of Mauricio Macri, who went back into a neoliberal form of governance, being the first Argentine president since the Kirchners to go to the WEF. Accelerating austerity programs, tore down the relationships they had with Latin American leftist leaders, aside from broad blanket alliances that meant nothing. But Macri had his own set of controversies. The Panama Papers, the arrest of an indigenous activist named Milagro Sala, being blamed for the death of a left-wing activist named Santiago Maladano, him allegedly lying about finding a missing submarine, and allegedly giving weapons to the Bolivian opposition while forbidding Evo Morales from crossing into his airspace. But of course, the biggest thing that defined his presidency was the beginning of an economic crisis tied to the devaluation of the Argentine peso, which led to high inflation in the country, which led to him becoming the first Argentine president to lose re-election when 2019 rolled around, and someone came back for a vengeance. Alberto Fernandez. No, wait, not him. It was his vice president that came back for a vengeance, Cristina Fernandez Kirchner, leading a new coalition called Frente de Todos, which was basically the Kirchners' front from before, but expanding it to include some centrists that didn't like the Kirchners prior, particularly members of a party called the Renewal Front, which included Alberto Fernandez. And since his VP was this very prominent political figure from yesteryear, who was very heavily involved in the administration's decisions, many people saw Alberto as basically being a puppet of whatever remained of Kirchnerism. Alberto was basically on the same level of the Kirchners, with the only thing seemingly different being the fact that he was more socially progressive, as social views have become more progressive as years go on, and his response to COVID. However, conspiracies about his relation to the Kirchners and other Latin American leftists, mixed with controversies worldwide in regards to COVID and overall vague criticisms of him, made his approval rating drop so low that if he were to run in the upcoming election, he would get like single-digit percentage points, which meant that he wouldn't have even gotten the nomination of his own coalition, so he would retire for the upcoming election. But before we get into the upcoming election, there's one more development that happened right before the election that kind of changed a lot of things. Okay, so due to Alberto Fernandez's unpopularity, many members of the Kirchner's coalition suggested that Cristina herself run for another term. Now, legally, she's not allowed to do so, but most people flat out concluded that she was running, and there was basically nothing that could stop her. And due to this, Cristina Fernandez Kirchner was getting more scrutiny over certain things that happened during her administration, revolving around corruption. Then, on September 1st, 2022, around the time that this was going on, a far-right activist attempted to assassinate her. However, there was a certain subsection of the population that believes she faked her assassination attempt to get political points or whatever. Then, on December 6th of that year, despite her administration being cleared of all the charges prior, she was sentenced to 6 years in prison and a lifelong ban on running for office. Now, since she's vice president, she doesn't have to serve her prison sentence quite yet. So this was clearly done more to stop her from running for president in the upcoming election. And due to this, the Kirchner coalition was in a heck of a bind. Very similar to like what happened with Lula in the 2018 Brazilian election. It's like, on one hand, there was like this coalition had extremely bad blood due to the incumbent president and the brand of this party being tarnished. But then there was a certain figure that had enough popularity that they could have overcome that unpopularity, but they couldn't really do anything about that. So the only solution that this coalition had was to change their name in order to make sure that people didn't associate them with the administration prior. However, this didn't really do much to quell any of the dividing factions within the party, and there were many factions ready to go. Like, literally, there were a ton of people who were gearing up to run with their own separate factions of the coalition in the upcoming election, all of which being incredibly big names, with 3 big people in contention, like very ready to run for president. The 2 of which I will mention were Minister of the Interior Eduardo de Pedro and the 2015 candidate of the Kirchner coalition, Daniel Sciloli, both of whom were Kirchner loyalists, who announced 2 days before the filing deadline. But then, the day before the filing deadline, Alberto Fernandez came in and unilaterally decided that the coalition will unite behind one candidate, neither of the 2, and would instead unite behind a different candidate, which many people perceive as one final fuck you to the Kirchners before he left. And due to this, both of those people suspended their bids for the presidency. However, there did remain one person who would end up running instead. His name is Juan Grabois, who did run a primary bid against the anointed candidate of this coalition, who was running with the party called Frente Patria Grande, which indicated that even though he was a Kirchnerist, he was a little bit more to the left of a Kirchnerist. However, that didn't end up doing so hot, as he didn't end up winning because, again, they unilaterally appointed one person to be the candidate, and that candidate is a relatively popular person within their coalition, at least, so there was really nothing else he could have done. And with that, let's get into some of the issues of the upcoming election. Really, the biggest issue that seems to be going on with the Argentinian election is the economy and their crisis. And usually it revolves around one of 2 things: either the devaluing of the peso and their currency issues, and BRICS. We'll get into that when we get into the candidates. speaking of candidates, and if you know anything about Argentinian politics, which you might or you might not, let me explain it like this. We are currently in round 2 of a potential 3-round process. Okay, so round 1 is something called PASO, or in translated to English, primary, open, simultaneous, and obligatory. Basically, it's a jungle primary where every candidate of every party and their caucuses and coalition members all run against each other on the same day. For the most recent PASO, 27 candidates ended up running. They all run against each other, they all tally their votes, whatever. Then we go by the individual party members and then add all of the people who are registered with the same party list together. An example, Principles and Values was a coalition in this election, and they ran 5 candidates. Some of the candidates in that coalition did not do so hot, only getting around 200 votes. Some got around 1,000, 2,000, but then there was one member of the party that got 183,000 votes. Pretty impressive, right? But then they add all their votes together. And then you find out total, they didn't get that many votes. Only got 0.79% of the votes. And since altogether they did not meet the 1.5% threshold, that party gets eliminated. Every party that doesn't have a combined total of at least 1.5% gets eliminated from contention. Alright then, so that eliminates a ton of the candidates off the get-go. Alright, so now we are left with 5 coalitions with 8 candidates in total. So what happens next? First, all the people who ran solo without another coalition partner automatically get elevated to the next round, to the general election. And to all the coalitions that did have more than one person running, only the highest vote getter in that coalition moves on to the next round. No matter if that member of the coalition that doesn't move on also managed to reach above the threshold. All the candidates who qualify move on to the general election. And if nobody gets 45% outright, or gets 40% with second place getting 30%, the top 2 candidates in the general election move on to a runoff. So with all that out of the way, there are 5 people who are moving on to the general election. I'll be mentioning all 5 of the candidates, regardless of how likely or unlikely they will be to be making it to the runoff. All the way at the bottom, we have Miriam Bregman, who is a deputy and the vice presidential candidate of her party/coalition in 2015. She's running with the Workers' Left Front Unity Coalition, a Trotskyist political coalition of a bunch of smaller political parties. The Socialist Workers' Party, the Workers' Party, Socialist Left, Workers' Socialist Movement. Basically, they're all Trotskyist parties. I don't know why, but for some reason Argentina has a small but noticeable Trotskyist communist bloc. I don't know. It's there, and they do manage to stick around, at least to the general election. But again, they're not really going to go that far. Her running mate is Nicolas de Caño, the person who led the party's ticket in 2015 and 2019. Okay, so the next candidate is Juan Schiaretti, who is the governor of Cordoba, who is running under the We Do For Our Country coalition, while being a member of the Justicialist Party. The party, in coalition, espouses federal Peronism as its ideology. Coalition members include the Christian Democratic Party, as the name suggests, a Christian Democratic Party, the Socialist Party, a center-left social democratic/democratic socialist party. I guess Juan is able to keep the Peronist tradition alive by appealing to the left and the right. His VP is Deputy Florencio Randazzo. But really, most people are saying that it's a top 3, the other 3 candidates are the ones that are seen as the main forces for the upcoming election. So first, we have Patricia Bullrich, who is a former deputy and cabinet minister. She is running under the Juntos por el Cambio coalition, Together for Change coalition. Coalition members include Republican Proposal, a neoliberal party that Bullrich is a member of, the Radical Civic Union, a liberal political party, Civic Coalition ARI, a liberal anti-corruption political party, Generation for a National Encounter, a social democratic political party, Democratic Progressive Party, a center-right liberal party, and Unir Constitutional Nationalist Party, a center to far-right party modeled after Macri. Her vice president is former deputy and pre-candidate for governor of Mendoza, Luis Petri of the Radical Civic Union. Her platform is basic neoliberal stuff, reducing taxes. She wants to use the peso and the US dollar. She wants to scrap currency controls. She wants to get another deal with the IMF. She wants to copy Bukele's approach to drug traffickers. Big sus sign. But the biggest thing that she seems to be running out at the moment is that she is anti-BRICS. Okay, so the next candidate is Sergio Massa, the third place finisher in 2015 and the current Minister of the Economy. And yes, third place finisher in 2015 is kind of interesting considering the coalition he's running with. He is running under the Unión por la Patria, or Together for the Homeland coalition. Coalition members include Renewal Front, a centrist political party that he ran with in 2015, the Justicialist Party, the Peronist Party, Partido de la Victoria, a party formed by Nestor Kirchner to bring people who hated Peronism into his coalition, the Evita movement, a Kirchner's party formed to admire Evita, and the Frente Patria Grande, the party Juan Grabois ran under. His running mate is former deputy, former cabinet minister, but current cabinet chief, Agustin Rossi, a Kirchner loyalist. His platform is maintaining the IMF deal that is currently on the table, but not doing another deal with the IMF, maintaining the price controls that they have currently, but not doing more, potentially joining with Brazil to form a common currency, an $18.4 billion currency swap with China, and the biggest thing for him at the moment is being pro-BRICS, because he's technically the one that got Argentina into BRICS. But, of course, the candidate that is getting a lot of people's attention at the moment is Javier Milei, an anarcho-capitalist pundit turned national deputy, running under the La Libertad Avanza coalition. Coalition members include the Libertarian Party, a Big Tent Libertarian Party, minarchist to ANCAP, the Democratic Party, no, not that one, a conservative party that has roots in the military coup of Irigoyen, Republican Force, a militarist political party, Celestial and White Union, a socially conservative federal Peronist party, and the Faith Party, which is another Peronist party. His VP is Victoria Villarreal, a defender of the military junta. His platform includes shutting down Argentina's central bank, dumping the peso in favor of the US dollar, loosening firearm regulations, school vouchers, pension cuts, privatizing schools, state-run industries, and doctors, and, as of now, seems to be meh on BRICS. You see, on one end, he says, I'm not going to push for deals with communists because they don't respect the basic parameters of free trade, freedom, and democracy. It's geopolitics. But when pushed on whether or not he would tell the people in the economy if they can trade with BRICS, he says, I'm not going to get involved in that, it's the free market. So like I said, essentially meh on BRICS. He wants to have his cake and eat it too. And just to show how interesting he is, let's give some various random cringe political takes that aren't necessarily part of his platform. He's anti-abortion, even calling a 10-year-old rape victim a murderer if she were to get abortion. He's called climate change deceptions promoted by the neo-Marxists. He's a COVID conspiracy nut, and has advocated for the legalization of the organ trade and selling children, which, given the fact that he's a libertarian, very much is interesting to note that he's okay with selling children. I mean, it means something that I don't think he wants to say publicly, because if he said it publicly, it would be bad. And I don't even think he thinks that he means this, but let's just think about it for logistically for 2 seconds. literally, why would somebody sell a child or buy a child? It doesn't take a rocket surgeon to figure out what is going to happen. And if that's part of his plan, it makes sense. He's a libertarian. He's also openly admired Donald Trump and Jair Bolsonaro, which is weird, but also not weird, considering all the freaking, like, far-right people are the same thing, really. Like, all the people who are on, like, the bottom end of the far-right political spectrum are basically the same as the people on the top. What is interesting about Méliès is simply just because he at least appears to be somewhat of a different branch of the traditional... Like, because here's the thing. The traditional left-right elements of Latin American politics are kind of dead. Like, rather than just the traditional form of leftist politics there, or the traditional form of rightist politics there, now we're getting this new branch, like Nayib Bukele and Javier Milei are basically sort of like the new faces of the Latin American right wing, which is very sad and tragic, because, yeah, are they really that different from what came before them? Really not that much, just in sort of branding. And another thing that's interesting about this election is that it's sort of maintaining the same thing that we're seeing with a lot of Latin American elections, and by that I mean Mexico, but there are other ones that do have similar elements of that, where this one is sort of like, I think the first one where we're seeing it, where we're sort of having, because the three main candidates in the race are Massa, Bullrich, and Milei. And what we're seeing is that you're given three options. Bullrich wants to take you back to the past and, like, remember Macri and remember Menem? Those guys were cool. Meanwhile, Massa is saying, remember Fernandez? He's pretty cool. Meanwhile, Méliès is saying, fuck both of those guys. I'm going to do something completely different. And those are your options. Do you like the past? Do you like the present? Or do you like the future? A lot of elections sort of hold on that mentality. 2016 in America is a prime example. Trump ran on the past, Hillary ran on the present, Bernie ran on the future. 2018 Mexican election had a similar thing. Made ran on the present, Anaya ran on the past, and then AMLO ran in the future. The problem is, of course, Méliès's future is not a bright one, but many people are seeing it as a bright one, specifically because they don't like the present and they don't like the past. So basically, anything Méliès could say would make people gravitate towards them. Even though, funnily enough, Méliès is literally just running on selling his country to America. Like, as Bad Empanada pointed out in his video where he talked about Méliès, let's just think about this logistically. Méliès is advocating for the abolition of the Central Bank of Argentina and the abandoning of the Argentinian currency for the American currency. So he's literally just sending Argentina to deal with America's economic problems. The problems of the American economy are going to be the problems of the Argentinian economy, and doing this while basically advocating for anything that makes Argentina even remotely good to be gone, including the, like literally, he said that he wants to make it so that you have to pay to go to doctors in Argentina. It's like, really? Why? That's literally one of the things that Argentina has that is like a plus to America. Why would you want to make it actively worse? And the bad thing is, it looks like he is poised to win because any polling that has been conducted showed Méliès usually on the top. The only time that he wasn't considered on the frontrunner status was when they were finally defining the candidates and Bullrich was starting to get famous, but then it's quickly gravitated again to Méliès being the favorite. The polls that have been conducted that have all the candidates in the field, or at the very least the top three, have Méliès winning in the 30s, while Bullrich and Massa remain in the 20s. The closest one we got is Méliès with 38.5, with Massa at 32.3, which leads into another problem, because in the second round, they're polling Méliès versus Bullrich, Bullrich versus Massa, Massa versus Méliès. And here are the results for those. Méliès versus Bullrich has 38 to Méliès, 32 to Bullrich. Then Méliès to Massa, 51 to Méliès, 37 to Massa. Bullrich and Massa, 51-35. Then Millier to Bullrich again, 39-31. Millier to Massa again, 49-30. Bullrich Massa again, 44-32. Like, unfortunately, Massa is the one candidate in the field that it's just not looking in his favor. Because not only is Massa's not just a member of the Kirchner's coalition. He's not really that much of a good member of the Kirchner's coalition. He's basically moderate Peronist to a degree, like a right of center, like Peronist. Like basically the worst aspects of Peronism. He is no Kirchner, and while everybody thought that might be a benefit, it ain't looking like a benefit at this point. Now, the results, you see, this is one where I basically washing my hands clean of the affair. There really aren't any candidates really worthwhile in this upcoming election. If you are in Argentina, if you're an Argentinian viewer watching this, my recommendation would be in this round, vote for Bregman. Then, if Massa makes it to the second round, vote for him. That's basically all I can say on that. Really, if you feel compelled to try and get Massa into the next round, then by all means, you're free to do so. But yeah, it's looking like this ain't gonna be a W for the Pink Tide. Wasn't gonna be a W for the Pink Tide regardless. Anyways, thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click that bell to notify when a future video that comes out. And if you need more content from me, you can go to our website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.